All right. We are back with some Thunder deck profile today. We are going to be showing off our list that we'll be taking to locals, and yeah, I'm excited to get back into the physical card game. I've been doing a lot of online and having some fun with this strategy, so yeah, love to show off what we got here and obviously open up for any feedback that folks might have. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So we're going to start off with our triple Thunder Dragon, the OG himself. I'm a big fan of this at 3. It's not a once per turn, so you're always triggering this. And yeah, this guy or your Dark plus any Bestial is Colossus on itself, which I really like. So I don't think there's any reason not to play this at 3, especially in a more pure build like this one. And then I did mention the Dark. We're on 3 Dark, which is a little bit different, I would say, than some of the maybe more combo-oriented, just using the Thunder Dragons as an engine. Like I said, this is a bit more of a pure profile, so I actually really like Dark at 3. I think that it definitely, lends itself to the Titan play. Having a quick effect that you can use to trigger Titan is fantastic. And so opening this guy up is actually great. Obviously, there's an argument to be made for triple Roar, but I like Roar at 2. Because when you draw it, it's really not great unless you have a way to get it out of your hand and then banish it. So I think for that very reason, I'm actually a bigger fan of Roar at 2. And then, of course, the 1 Hawk. You really don't want to draw this one. You're always searching this out of the deck. And this is kind of your Monster Reborn. Or, there are times where it comes up to fix your hand. Absolutely, it's come up in the past. And so, yeah, no more than 1 Hawk, but, obviously we're going to be playing that. And then this might be a slight deviation from pure builds. We only have 2 Solar, and that is because we're running some other normal summons in the deck. And Solar's great. There may be a time for me to bump this up to 3, but I've bricked on it enough to kind of like it at 2. I think it definitely is a great starter. And, this obviously kind of counts as some of the others where it can kind of get your Thunder plays going. It dumps any of them. And then the token actually really comes up for our Ringo Worm, which we are playing here as well. And then the 1 Fusion, like I said, we are playing the Titan in our extra deck. And so for that very reason, we are on the Fusion. This plus your Hawk are really kind of your 2 ways to kind of extend with your Thunder bodies and continue to spam them out on the field. So not to mention, obviously, the Fusion's follow-up effect where, on the next turn, you can banish it to add any Thunder. It's really great, too. So I love just kind of setting this up, putting this in the grave, getting a Titan that I sometimes just link off, but just having this in the grave for follow-up is so key. And we're obviously on the double Titan here, so we can always continue to fuse back our materials. And then for the Bestial side of things, I really do think you got to play the Bestials and Thunder these days. We're on the triple Lubellion here, and that's because obviously this is kind of the best one to see. It's really the starter of all the Bestials, and gosh, setting up both the Regained or the Branded Beast is just too good. So we're obviously going to be playing 3 Lubellion. The 1 Magnemite, it's limited to 1 for a reason. I don't think it should ever be at more than 1. Good argument for it getting banned, but since it's at 1, we're obviously going to be playing it. And then we're on the triple Sorinir. This is fantastic because, again, Bestials and Thunder really go well together, so I want more Bestial names. And Sorinir serves a number of purposes in this deck. If you brick on the Lubellions, Sorinir can dump another one, so you can banish one to then special summon the other. You can use it to set up your Regained and Beast on your turn 1, which is great. And then not to mention, this guy just dumps too, so you can just use this to foolish one of your dead Bestial names or something like that, and just load up more Darks in the grave, which is really great for Levianeer. This version of Thunder is a little hand-rippy, and so having those extra Darks for Levianeer to use for banishment to summon itself is really great. And then we are on the 1 Druis and 1 Baldrake. So the reason we're playing all of the Bestial names, I just like having multiple names. It means you're going to be able to summon each of them. Obviously, Druis is one of the best ones in a vacuum. Using it to remove something is pretty fantastic. But Baldrake is great. The interruption that it provides definitely comes up. And again, it's just a name. So, worst case, you're just going to send this off of Sorinir and use it as dark material. But I actually really like Baldrake at 1. And you can obviously bring this off of Seals. That's an extra interruption as well, so I'm a big fan of the Baldrake. And then we've got the 1 Regained and 1 Beast. This is pretty standard. Some people like cutting Beasts in Bestial lineups, but I think it's great. Besides, the only time it's bad is when you're going second and you draw it. But if you're going second, you can set this up off of the Lubellion and then, tribute off something like your Seals or something like that to really get some value, start breaking your opponent's board. But I love Beast in the main deck. I don't think I'm gonna ever move it to the side anytime soon, at least. I think it's just too good to not play, because you kind of tutor this out with the Lubellion, and it's really just fantastic. So then to move on to some of our just kind of generic dragons themselves, we've got a pretty interesting dragon package here. So we are on the double Ringo Worm. So this kind of functions as an extra normal summon. It's not really a starter, so that's something to consider. But this really opens up your synchro lines. Like I said, we are a little hand rippy. We are on the Omega Disc Patter combo to just rip. When this deck really pops off, you're ripping 4 cards out of your opponent's hand, which is just ridiculous. I mean, this just harkens back to the Gumblar days of old. So I really like Ringo Worm at 2. I like seeing it. There's a number of ways to fetch this out of the deck. So you don't need to play it at 3. You could even play it at 1, but I love seeing this in my hand. Especially when you've got, a decent combo. And not to mention, this thing can just load the grave. We're playing Strikers, so we can link this off immediately after normal summoning it. And not to mention, Ringo does summon itself if you've got a token. So we have nibs in the side, but the Batteryman Solar can also generate a token that then allows you to extend into the Ringo Worm, which is really great. So you don't have to commit this as your normal summon too, which is nice. So I'm a big fan of Ringo at 2. It's just, it on its own, or really not on its own, but this plus, something else can lead to 2 synchro summons, which is just ridiculous. It's a double tuner, essentially. And then for some of the other dragons, we are playing the Baby Chaos, RIP to the White and Master Duel. Unfortunately, it's just not a thing there, which makes sense, I guess, but in the TCG, it's obviously here, so we're playing this at 3. And then, either of these or the Safer that we're playing as well can kind of climb into an early seal, which you can use as kind of nib installation to kind of protect yourself from Nibiru, or you can use the seal to then just tribute off with one of your bigger Thunder bodies, and then, have your seal summoned from deck, which is great too. The reason I like Safer at 1, again, this is our other normal summon. I would say this is kind of the actual third normal summon, in addition to the Solar. This thing can kind of bridge some of your dragon engines. You can use this to, send a Bestial to grab a different Bestial. You can use this to send a level 8 dragon to grab either, your Lubellion to get your Bestial plays going, or you use you send the Lubellion off of this to then grab some of your bigger Chaos dragons. And so we are on the triple lineup here: the Levy, the Chaos Emperor, Dragon of Armageddon, and the Diabolos. These 2 are just ridiculous for ripping hands. This guy pops out all the time in this deck because you're always tributing darks. And, Levianeer is kind of just a fantastic toolbox for dragons in general. Whether you want to pop 2 cards, you want to Reborn from the grave, which there's definitely enough lights in this deck for you to be able to banish 3 and get that effect. Or the Hand Rip, which, is I think my favorite effect on Levy. And then Emperor, I was not sold on this card for the longest time, but especially with the high Bestial count, we're banishing dragons all the time. His best effect is really as a pendulum scale, where you place him in the pendulum zone, you pay 1,000, and then you can grab back a banished dragon. So there are definitely times that come up where you're using your Sorneer to dump a Lubellion and then grab a have some way to banish that Lubellion, and then this can grab it back, which then uses Lubellion's hand effect to search. So it's really so good. So I think all 3 have their place. There's definitely times where I've used the send effect. It's not great, but it does come up. And then not to mention, you can banish a light and a dark to summon this. So, you're triggering your thunder effects when they're banished anyways. So I really like this card. It definitely grew on me. And then of course Diabolos, right? He's popping out all the time. He's a level 8. They're all level 8s actually, which is super relevant in this deck. And he's a big body. He's got some decent protection on him as well. So not to mention, when I first kind of saw Diabolos kind of being played a lot in Thunder, I was like, oh, he's always tributing himself. You just tribute a dark. So let's say you any dark on your field, you tribute with this guy, which could include himself. But more often than not, you're tributing a different dark, like a non-level 8 dark. And that's because you can use this guy for your rank 8 toolbox as well. So yeah, this kind of comprises your dragon lineup. And then to bridge both kind of the Bestials, which want to banish your Thunders, and to get your Thunders in the grave, we are on the Horus package here. So triple Imseti, of course, you're always maxing out on this. This one grabs your King Sark. It's just so good on its own. It's a huge body. It's level 8, of course. And then I'm on the Keb instead of the Happy. I think Happy's effect is obviously better than this one, but especially with all of these skill drains I'm seeing in the format these days, this extra 100 attack has definitely come up for me. So I personally like Keb. I think there's an argument to swap him out for the Happy. But yeah, for right now, I think I'm going to stick to that just until I see a reduction in skill drains. But unfortunately, that card's just going crazy. And then we're on the double King Sark. I definitely don't want to brick on this and see too many. But having the 2 is great because you can kind of fool your opponent into thinking you only have 1, and then you slap the second one down and you're good to go. Not to mention if you draw 1, you can still use your Imseti to search the other one out and get an extra draw. So all in all, I like King Sark at 2. Could play it at 3. I'm personally not a big fan of that. And then the mandatory draw spell, since we are on a bunch of darks, but especially since we're playing Thunders, we're on the triple Allure of Darkness. This is great. Gosh, it's like Pot of Greed in this deck. So good. And then I'm on the double Melody here. And I think the reason I like Melody at 2 is because the kind of the big chaos monsters that you're playing here, the big dragons that you're searching off of Melody, your targets, they on their own are not great. So as a starter, I don't really like seeing Melody. This is, it's an activator. It can kind of put a Thunder in grave, which is great, if you have a Bestial in addition to this. But I definitely don't like seeing Melody at 3 and just bricking on that on your opening hand, because this on its own is not going to really get your plays going unless you've got some other gas to really pop off with it. And then some of the power 1-up spells here are just your Chaos Space and Gold Sark. Gold Sark needs no introduction in a Thunder deck. And then with your Chaos Space, there's so many targets with this. I mean, you've got either of your Chaos Dragons here, you've got the babies, you have your Lubellion, and so because of that, there's just so many ways to kind of use this to either as a starter to kind of make a seal. You can kind of get your Thunders in the grave too, so there's really no reason not to play Chaos Space, at least in my opinion with this deck. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this engine. I think it's, all in all, there's just so much gas here. And then in terms of some defensive cards, the engine, like I said, the engine itself is so strong that you really don't need much. So I'm just on the triple Imperm just because, this doesn't trigger talents. I think it was between this and Valor, something that's not once per turn that I can use multiple of on my opponent's turn. Or it's great going first as well to turn off some columns. So I love the Imperm, and then I'm on the triple Droplet as well. Again, decent going first. I see this a little bit more often than I'd like, but this is another way to load your graveyard with lights and darks to then either banish them or, use your Bestials to get your Thunder plays going. So, and Droplet just hits a lot in this format, in my opinion. So, these are kind of the only kind of going second or like defensive cards that we've got in the strategy. And again, just because the main deck is just so strong on its own and the engine can really push through a lot, that I think that it's fine like that. So yeah, that kind of comprises our main deck. So we'll go ahead and jump on into the extra deck here. And we'll start with the 1 Colossus. So happy this guy's back. I think it's totally fine at 1 these days. There's so many ways to remove it now. The game's really progressed. But he just stops adding, which is so relevant today. It definitely hurts Snake Eye. They have to have some way to negate it, or that's going to really slow down their plays. Tons of other decks get hit by Colossus, so if I can, I'm almost always ending on it. It is level 8 though, so it definitely comes up where you can use this for rank 8 plays. Because you're on the fusion as well, you can very easily fuse this thing back or put it back with the branded regained and then just make it again. So really, really solid. And then I think for any pure Thunder player, you're gonna have at least 2 copies of Titan in your extra deck. And that's just because when you make the first one, you want to be able to make another one off of your fusion that you're able to grab back. And you can just constantly be recycling your Thunder plays. And so that's why we're on the 2. And this is also why we're on the triple Dark as well, because that's a great way to trigger this thing on your opponent's turn and really turn this into an interruption here. So I love that. And that's kind of it for our fusions. And then we're gonna move on to our, actually we'll keep everything fanned out here. So we got our fusions and then on to our XYZs. We are on the Atum. Another one of those cards that it really grew on me. We have such a high Bestial count that this is the bridge between all of your different dragons, right? This is essentially LP, gets a dragon right out of the deck by using the 2 level 6 dragons to make it. and it's so great. You can either use this to kind of bring out your Ringo Worm, or you can bring out you know, a Magnemite and search in the end phase. There's really so many things that this thing can help you extend into that I think the Atum is really a no-brainer. And then another starter here, the Zombie Vampire. So many 8s in this deck, and so Vampire is just fantastic. I think it's in a lot of extra decks these days for good reason. One thing that I like doing is putting them in the second and fourth columns, just because Anima can't take this guy. Nobody can target this thing with special summon monsters except those from the graveyard, and so making Anima, I've definitely seen some opponents misplay where they think they can take this and they can't. But it's just one of the best extenders. Sending 4 from yours and your opponent's deck, unless they're on Tier Element, which you're not making this card, just terrific. And then for some negation here for the rank 8s, we've got both the Galaxy Eyes Photon Lord and the Hope Harbinger. This stops monsters, can kind of set this up early to insulate yourself from Nibiru, and then this stops spells and traps. So as you're kind of building your end board with this deck, it's good to have both some monster and spell and trap negates, so you can kind of, you know, play that accordingly. And then obviously games 2 and 3, you're going to be making them based on your matchup appropriately. And then for our synchros here, we are doing a little hand rip shenanigans. So we're on the Omega, very easy to make, and we're on the Dispatter. So yeah, these two kind of rip 2 cards. Dispatter, you know, without Omega is still fantastic. There's so many things you're banishing that, you know, this guy's great. And then, you know, Omega really needs no introduction here. It's a little degenerate, not gonna lie, but yeah, we're playing that for that reason, because this deck just makes it so well, especially with the Ringo Worm inclusion. So then for our third and final Synchro monster here, we are on Chaos Angel. It's really, really easy to make in this deck, and sometimes you actually make this going first, just to play around Nibiru a little bit and to give yourself some extra protection. You know, helping monsters not be able to be destroyed by battle is so huge. And, you know, there's so many easy ways to make this, because this guy doesn't even require a tuner. You can use lights and darks to meet the requirement here. And so more often than not, the easiest way you're making this is with a Solar and a Bestial. You use, you know, you kind of normal summon your Solar, you're spamming out bodies left and right. And for that 5th summon, you can climb into the Chaos Angel with your Batteryman Solar, or just going second. This guy's ripping apart boards, and it's towers. So I'm personally a huge fan of the Chaos Angel in this strategy. I think it's a pretty easy inclusion to justify. And then moving on here, we have our links. And what's really cool, I think, just objectively from an extra deck perspective, this plays all of the different extra deck types, which is just so cool in my opinion. So we're on the Striker Seal. I really hate, I mean, as you can you're probably starting to see, their extra deck is so tight in this deck. It is a bummer we have to dedicate a spot to Striker, but we're playing the baby Chaos Dragons and the Ringo, and so for that reason, we do need a way to get them into the grave without having to commit more, and Striker just allows you to do that. So we are on the 1 Striker, and then obviously the Seal, one of the best cards in the extra deck, honestly. There are many times where you're making this turn 1, and you're just tributing over it to then get its second effect. But yeah, otherwise, you can just end on this, and you're feeling pretty solid as well. We are on the IP, because everybody's on IP, and the Unicorn because, yeah, I'm not going to be forking over for that SP Little Knight. So Unicorn's a pretty fine addition instead. And then, of course, we have Appaloosa as well, which we can climb into either on our turn or our opponent's thanks to IP. And we don't really need an access code for this deck, because so many of our bodies are huge, and there's so many other ways to pop things that I think it's a little redundant, and having some extra negation, especially for monster negation, is great, because then you can pair this with, let's say, the Hope Harbinger, and then you've kind of got all your bases covered. So yeah, that's it for our extra deck. Like I said, it's super tight, maybe a few things to move around in there, but overall, I think it's performed really well for me, at least what I've done in testing online. And then we're on to the side deck, very meta specific, and of course, yeah, we're on the triple dimensional barrier, because why wouldn't you play this? If you know you're going first, absolutely this is going in against everything besides Snake Eye, just because it hits so many of the other best decks in the format. So we're playing that. And then yeah, if we're going first, we're gonna encourage a little bit of degeneracy as well. There are some spells in this deck, but there's not many. Obviously, besides the droplets and some of these power spells, the rest are just all monsters. And so for that very reason, we're not hurt too bad by anti-spell, and this hurts some decks just so badly. So I'm a big fan of that. And then for going second, I think you have the option of doing board breakers or hand traps. And there's a good argument to stick to hand traps, but I think I can get away with doing more board breakers in this deck, in my opinion, because the engine is so strong at breaking boards on its own, that this can kind of simplify the game state, and then I'll just push through with my engine. And I think evenly matched just hits so much this format, especially with these crazy, back rows that people are setting up in addition to their monster lineups, that I think there's no reason not to consider evenly matched. And then we are on the triple tactics talent in the side. This one goes in either first or second almost every time, and it really just depends on how many hand traps I'm seeing out of my opponent. But it's a fantastic card. I think it's got to be somewhere in your main or side deck. And then we're on the double cosmic because you have to play it. There's just so many floodgates we're seeing in this format. Evenly does hit those because it's a trap, and so many of the floodgates like anti-spell or evenly completely dodges. But we still need some extra ways to deal with some of our opponent's pesky spells and traps. And so for that very reason, we are on the double cosmic. May bump this one up to 3 and maybe cut evenly down. Really just depends on kind of what I'm seeing from my locals once I show up there. And then if we are going to play a hand trap, we're going to play a fantastic one, which is Nibiru. And so, yeah, if we're seeing our opponents kind of popping off with their special summons, this is almost always going in. Just one of the best hand traps in the metagame right now, I would say. It being a light absolutely comes up. It putting up a token is fantastic for the Ringo Worm. So I think there's a solid justification for, if you're gonna land on one hand trap, you might as well go with Nibiru. But yeah, that kind of wraps up our deck profile, the physical card profile for our Thunder list here. I've had a lot of fun with this deck. It's definitely a pet deck of mine. So yeah, we're gonna see how it does, and maybe tweak some things and maybe do an update later on. But yeah, overall, it's just so much fun, and yeah, I'll probably be on this Thunder strategy for a little bit. But yeah, thanks for watching.